Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Um, Today we're going to be studying from Surah 22, verse 38. Just want to check if our stream is running because I got an error. Let me just check. Okay, I think it's working. Okay, never mind. Okay, so we're going to be reading from Surah 22, verse 38. Let's all seek refuge in God from Satan the rejected. God defends the believers. God defends those who believe. God does not love any betrayer unappreciative. Uh, Wait, oh, sorry. No. I'm sorry. I think, why did I? No, sorry, we're going to read from Surah 22, verse 15 to 37, not 38. So we're going to read from 22:15, not 22:38. That I was going ahead of myself. So, happiness now and forever. If anyone thinks that God cannot support him in this life and in the hereafter, let him turn completely to his Creator in heaven and sever his dependence on anyone else. He will see then this plan eliminates anything that bothers him. We have thus revealed clear revelations herein, then God guides whomever he wills. God, the only judge. Those who believe, those who are Jewish, the converts, the Christians, the Zoroastrians, and the idol worshippers, God is the one who will judge among them on the day of resurrection. God witnesses all things. Do you not realize that to God prostrates everyone in the heavens and the earth, and the sun, and the moon, and the stars, and the mountains, and the trees, and the animals, and many people? Many others among the people are committed to doom. Whomever God shames, none will honor him. Everything is in accordance with God's will. How terrible is hell? Here are two parties feuding with regard to their Lord. As for those who disbelieve, uh, they will have clothes of fire tailored for them. Hellish liquid will be poured on top of their heads. It will cause their insides to melt, as well as their skins. They will be confined in iron pots. Whenever they try to exit such misery, they will be forced back in. Taste the agony of burning, the bliss of heaven. God will admit those who believe and lead a righteous life into gardens with flowing streams. They will be adorned therein with bracelets of gold and pearls, and their garments therein will be silk. They have been guided to the good words. They have been guided in the path of the most praised. Surely, uh, those who disbelieve and repulse others from the path of God and from the sacred masjid that we designated for all the people, be they natives or visitors, and seek to pollute it and corrupt it, we will afflict them with painful retribution. A footnote for 22:19 through 22 says, people who have insisted upon going to hell will inevitably complain. Had we known how bad this is, we would have behaved differently. They will be told that the horrors of hell have been pointed out to them in the most graphic, though symbolic terms. It should be noted that heaven and hell are almost invariably mentioned together in the Quran. Surah 22, verse 26, pilgrimage, like all duties in Islam, decreed through Abraham. We appointed Abraham to establish the shrine. You shall not idolize any other god beside me, and purify my shrine for those who visit it, and those who live near it, and those who bow and prostrate. And proclaim that the people shall observe Hajj pilgrimage. They will come to you walking or riding on various exhausted means of transportation. They will come from the farthest locations. And then the footnote says, Abraham was the original messenger of submission, Islam, See 2278 and Appendix 9. Verse 28, they may seek commercial benefits, and they shall commemorate God's name during the specified days for providing them with livestock. Eat therefrom and feed the despondent and the poor. They shall complete their obligations, fulfill their vows, and visit the ancient shrine. Those who reverence the rights decreed by God have deserved a good reward at their Lord. All livestock is made lawful for your food, except for those specifically prohibited for you. You shall avoid the abomination of idol worship and avoid bearing false witness. You shall maintain your devotion absolutely to God alone. Anyone who sets up any idol beside God is like one who fell from the sky, then gets snatched up by vultures or blown away by the wind into a deep ravine. Indeed, those who reverence the rights decreed by God demonstrate the righteousness of their hearts. Livestock offerings during pilgrimage. The livestock provide you with many benefits for a period before being donated to the ancient shrine. For each congregation, we have decreed rites whereby they commemorate the name of God for providing them with livestock. Your God is one and the same God. You shall all submit to him. Give good news to the obedient. They are the ones whose hearts tremble upon mentioning God, and they steadfastly persevere during adversity. They observe the contact prayer salat, and from our provisions to them they give to charity. The animal offerings are among the rites decreed by God for your own good. You shall mention God's name on them while they are standing in line. Once they are offered for sacrifice, you shall eat therefrom, and feed the poor and the needy. This is why we subdued them for you, that you may show your appreciation. Footnote, animal offerings from the pilgrims conserve the resources at the pilgrimage site. Note that almost 2 million pilgrims converge on Mecca during pilgrimage. Verse 37, neither their meat nor their blood reaches God. What reaches him is your righteousness. He has subdued them for you, that you may show your appreciation by glorifying God for guiding you. Give good news to the charitable. So, God willing, I'm going to end here and go back to verse 15, which talks about God's promise of perfect happiness now and forever. And God tells us that, if anyone believes that, God cannot support him in this life and the hereafter, let him turn completely to his Creator in heaven and sever his dependence on anyone else. Now, this reminds me of the funny interpretations, that we see of this verse. Like if you look at the translation, of this verse from other translators, you come across like really bizarre, ideas. It's so there's like one that says anyone who fancies that Allah will not support him in
Oh
this
my
world
God.
and in the hereafter, let him reach out to heaven through a rope. Okay, to a rope. Then make a hole in the sky and see whether his device can avert that which enrages him. This is a great divergence of okay, yeah. And so there's like different translators. I'm sure they have tried to and then so this one says, this from Sahih International, says whoever thinks that Allah will not support Prophet Muhammad, of course, in this world and the hereafter, let him extend the rope to the ceiling, then cut off his breath, and let him see will his effort remove that which enrages him. So they're saying that if you think that God will not support Muhammad, then tie a rope and uh, kill yourself and see if it will help, which doesn't make any sense. But God is telling us here in this verse that God is the one who controls our happiness, and He is the only one we should depend on. And if you reach a point where your happiness depends on God alone, your dependence is only on God alone, then you will see that you will get that perfect happiness. When you sever your dependence on anyone else or anything else, then God is your God. Because if someone else or something else can affect your happiness or make you happy or take away your happiness other than God, then you're dependent on that thing, besides God. And for a submitter, we should only be dependent on God to give us everything. God is a source of all the happiness, and He is the source of everything. So if you totally depend on God alone and you sever your dependence on other entities, then you will reach that point where you will be perfectly happy, and God will eliminate any problems you might be suffering from, anything that is bothering you or anything like that. This is God's promise. um, and God is telling us, for example, that in verse 17, that God is the only judge. So He will judge the Zoroastrians, the idol worshippers, the Christians, the converts. Of course, God is the only judge. But that doesn't mean that you and I cannot judge people based on that, because God has given us His book and He has given us His law, so we know what His judgment is going to be. For example, for the idol worshippers, God's says, it's His law that anyone who will, no matter what they call themselves, if they maintain idol worship until death, they're destined for hell. So you can be rest assured that you can come to that judgment, because in accordance with God's judgment, and He has decreed these laws that He's not going to circumvent or make exceptions for people. So in that sense, He's the only judge. But you and I can definitely judge based on that. But He is the only judge, and He will judge among the people on the day of resurrection. And then another thing we see that in this world that verse 18 talks about is how everything in the heavens and the earth prostrates to God. You the earth, the sun, the moon, the stars, the trees, the mountains, the animals, and many people. Now, if you look at the many people, of course, many people submit to God, but others don't. However, all these people, that even the people that don't submit to God, their bodies submit to God, because their bodies are actually part of the earth. The earth is a submitter, and so these garments, these bodies are part of it. And so the our bodies also submit. For example, you and I cannot tell our heart to beat, slower or faster. Our God, it's doing that according to God. I mean, we cannot control our breakdown of different things in our bodies. For example, we have no knowledge of what chemicals are being fired from what areas of our body and where they're going, and all these chemical reactions that these cells are doing at the microscopic level. For example, it's all happening in accordance with God's laws, and they're all submitting to God. So God is in full control, and that's why it says, whomever God trains, none will honor him. Everything is in accordance with God's will, because He's in full control. Now, the rest of the verses that are following, that follow, this are about hell. And as we can see from the footnote, I mean, this is to give us a very clear picture on how terrible hell is going to be. And if we really ponder upon these verses, I mean, we can see like it is really terrible. It is extremely terrible. I mean, it's redundant, but uh, it says that, they will have clothes of fire tailored for them, you know. So like, if you get clothes that are custom made and tailored just for you, they'll be just for your size, um, you know, it shows that they'll be made of fire. It shows that you will get the maximum, uh, you know, um, pain out of that, maximum suffering, because they're tailored just for you, just for your body. Just it's not too uh, loose, for example, and so that you'll get some relief or something. It's just so the fire will constantly be hurting you, and your clothes will be constantly hurting you, and the insides will melt as well as the skins. They'll be so close to the people that their skins as well as their insides will melt. I mean, like when you get even like third degree burns, a lot of time, just doesn't melt your insides, of course. It just melts your outside, and then most people, it melts the outside and then they die. But here, if obviously, your insides will melt and the person will still not die, and the skins will be replaced, and they'll go through it again and again and again, which is horrible. And then it says they'll be confined in iron pots, and that's something like you see, like for example, when you cook something in an iron pot, for example, like a pressure cooker or something. I mean, you give it like maximum heat, you isolate it, and of course, to imagine that a body will go through that, it's extremely painful, just to even think about it. So imagine those people that will find out on the day of judgment that this is their destiny, could complain to God if this wasn't there, that they didn't know how terrible it is and they'll want another exit, another chance. But that's excuse nullified, because here we can see God is describing it like very graphic terms. Of course, it's allegorical, but very graphic, so we can have an idea. And whenever they try to exit it, they will be forced back. So there's no way out. At the same time, I mean, God describes paradise and the bliss of paradise and how beautiful that is. Obviously, especially if you compare it to hell, anything is beautiful, but and great. But uh, especially the bliss of heaven is something that is so beautiful when you think about it. Of course, it's described allegorically, that you'll have gardens with flowing streams, and you'll be wearing jewelry and gold and pearls and garments made of silk. And of course, these are things that you don't have access to, unless in this world, even unless you're like extremely rich, or royalty or something. But all the believers are going to have access to these things for eternity. um, and this is the reward for upholding God's words and following the right path. Of course, when you this is the price, when you the recompense for our actions in this world. And so when you compare that to things, the worldly things that people will settle for, whether it's peer pressure or maintaining friendship and stuff like that, of course they're making a very bad business deal, where they're selling their souls for things that are so cheap and insignificant, and temporary, because they truly have no belief in the hereafter. If people truly believe in the hereafter, they wouldn't, for example, like advocate idol worship to maintain friendship, for example, or adopt an innovation, to become popular amongst their peers, or compromise in order to not be persecuted, and just enjoy, you know, support from people and ally with the hypocrites or disbelievers for the worldly benefits, because this is the price to pay. And when you really know that the hereafter is a real life, of course, it doesn't make sense for you to do anything except to always side with God. And um, so then it talks about people who disbelieve and repulse others from the sacred masjid and seek to pollute and corrupt it. We will afflict them with painful retribution. And this is something that people have to be careful of, because we know that people are discouraging other people from observing Hajj, you know, and and based on some misinterpretations or things they're taking out of context regarding Hajj and telling people they shouldn't go to Mecca, you know. God says that they're actually repulsing people from going to the sacred masjid as well. And obviously, other people are also doing that by setting the worst examples uh, and repulsing people from becoming submitters in the first place, or going near it. So this verse applies to them also. Um, and verse 26 informs us that Hajj was given to Abraham, like other duties of submission, which is Salat, Zakat, fasting, and Hajj. All these four duties were given to Abraham as part of our religion. And it's mentioned here in this verse that he was to purify the shrine for those who live near it and those who visit it, those who bow and prostrate, and proclaim that people shall observe the Hajj pilgrimage. So it's a duty that we have to do once in our lifetime, once we can afford it. Obviously, we don't have to wait for the land to be purified or anything like that. Once you have attained righteousness to some degree by being a submitter for a good amount of time, like 10 years or so, you could definitely, and if you can afford it, by God's leave, then it's an obligation mm, upon us, like other duties in submission, and we should do it. Of course, if you can't afford it, then God is forgiver, most merciful, right? But for submitters, once in a lifetime, it's an obligation that was given to Abraham. And and also God is telling us that we can see commercial benefits during this time, and also we have to sacrifice an animal offering when we observe Hajj to conserve the resources at the pilgrimage site, because so many people will come for Hajj every year. And it's one of the rites of submission. One of the rites that need to be performed, uh, during Hajj. And uh, God says that, the example of idol worship in verse 31, I really like that. It says, "You shall maintain your devotion absolutely to God alone. Anyone who sets up any idol beside God is like one who fell from the sky, then gets snatched up by vultures or blown away by the wind into a deep ravine." And you can see that, like, visually, if you see this example, like, you can see a bird or something like that, that's flying high in the sky, soaring through the skies, and then eventually, something happens, and gets shot or something, and it falls down, and then immediately a vulture will come soaring and come and pick it up, and I mean, that vulture, you can think of like Satan. He'll come and claim the person right away, as his prey. uh, or he could get blown away by the wind, um, and just get destroyed completely. So idol worship is the only unforgivable offense to that. So we have to be extremely careful that we always devote our lives completely to God alone, and not to any person or group of people or anything like that. Our allegiance is to God alone, and we're going to be responsible and answerable to God as individuals. And our devotion has to be to God alone. Otherwise, if you commit idol worship, all our works will be nullified, and you will become the worst creature from the best creature, immediately, because all the works will become nullified. And God says that those people who reverence these rites decreed by God demonstrate the righteousness of their hearts. So these rites of God have to be reverenced and upheld and not distorted. And people who are distorting these rites are uh, committing a blasphemy, and they're demonstrating the exact opposite, demonstrating the evil in their hearts when they're not reverencing the rites and adding to them by adding things like circumcision, or preventing things like Hajj, stuff like that. Or people who call themselves so-called, the so-called Muslims, who have distorted all their rites too, and who alter the sacred months, for example, and other things. And these are all examples of people that are going to go to hell. The majority of believers are going to go to hell because they don't. The majority of people are committing idol worship, even though they are, saying they believe in God, but then when they go for Hajj, they go and visit Medina, for example, and worship Muhammad in the process, and nullify their Hajj by visiting his grave and stuff like that. So we are submitters, and we are blessed by God to have the correct rights purified for us, and by God's messenger, and we have to make sure that we don't pollute it with other rites or distort it like the traditional Muslims did, and the Jews and the Christians, how they lost them. So we can clearly see, because these rights were given to Abraham and followed through by all these messengers, but Satan has done his very best in trying to stop people from observing these rights in one way or another, because obviously, it's a weapon, it's a gift from God and a weapon we have against Satan to grow our souls. So he does his utter best to try to divert people and to corrupt it so they can't observe it, God's rights. Um, and the believers. Okay, and this is the verse 34 that says, "For each congregation we have decreed rites whereby they commemorate the name of God for providing them with the livestock. Your God is one and the same God. You shall all submit to him. Give good news to the obedient. They're the ones whose hearts tremble upon mentioning God, and they steadfastly persevere during adversity." So, being someone whose hearts tremble upon reverencing, about mentioning God, is a quality of a believer, because you love God so much that, as soon as God's name is mentioned, it does something to your heart. And if it doesn't, there is something wrong. But if you love God so much, this should be a natural feeling, because, God is so awesome and amazing, and so powerful that, when you mention him, if you truly believe in him, that it should, have that effect in your heart. Um, and there are people who obviously will not have that, because they don't truly believe in God. Um, and also, the quality of steadfastly persevering through adversity is very important. As submitters, I mean, it's a good quality to have in anybody, who's strong physically or mentally, for example, to never give up, and to keep trying. But for a submitter, it's an obligation, that we should never give up, and steadfastly persevere through adversity and worship God through all circumstances. But especially when we go through adversity, we should not despair, we should not lose hope, and we should keep our faith in God, and keep trying. And this is one of the commandments from God for us. Um, and also, some verses and at the end talk about these livestock offerings that are there to conserve the resources for pilgrimage. Is that these are among the rites decreed by God for our own good. They're among the rites decreed by God. It's part of Hajj, so it's part of the rites of Hajj. And the other thing is that when we sacrifice them for Hajj, when we sacrifice them, we should mention God's name upon them. And then once we sacrifice them, then we can eat from it and we can feed the poor and the needy. So it's not just for us. And then it says what reaches God is your righteousness. It's not the blood or the meat of the animals. So we should do this so that we can show our appreciation for glorifying God for guiding us. So God has given us all these blessings. And how do we appreciate him? We appreciate him by showing our appreciation is by action, which is through worship practices. We show our appreciation to God by glorifying him, and that's it. And it's also a charity. We can see that because you're feeding the poor and the needy with it as well. So that's why it says give good news to the charitable. So with this, I'd like to end, and God willing, any questions or comments are welcome at this time. Thank you.
Masha Allah.
Masha
Masha Allah, same. Me and Pamela saying the same thing,
So,
Masha Allah, good study. Praise God.
thank you. So.
Salon, so you know which one should get cleared up is do you remember you just mentioned that when we're at Hajj and we do the slaughter, we should mention God's name before we do the slaughter. Some people listening who may not be familiar listening may think that any food that they're eating when it's being slaughtered, you have to call upon God's name. So yeah, if that can get clarified.
Sorry, I didn't understand. What
So
part?
let me see the verse. Which verse is it? Okay, so it's verse 36.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So you shall mention God's name on it
Mm-hmm.
while they I seek refuge in God from Satan's rejected.
Mm-hmm.
36. The animal offering are among the rites decreed by God for your own good. You shall mention God's name on them while they are standing in line. Once they are offered for sacrifice, you shall not eat therefore and feed the poor. You shall eat therefore and feed the poor and the needy. This is why we subdue them for you, that you may show your appreciation. So when you explained it, you said we have to call God's name, but a lot of people out there would think that this goes for all animals slaughtered, and so that's what I
Mm-hmm.
said. If you clarify that,
Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I mean, if you are actually sacrificing them uh, yourself, you know, slaughtering them yourself, then you should mention God's name. But it's at the same time, if you're just buying meat, from the store, I mean, you don't expect them to do it for you. So, that's not a requirement. I mean, that's something that God wants us to do for ourselves when we sacrifice them. But, it's not an obligation in terms of the food to be haram or prohibited or not, or halal or lawful. So, when you go and buy meat from the store, I mean, obviously you have to make sure that it's not dedicated to an idol, and as long as it's not, and then it's not from the prohibited categories of food that God has mentioned, which is like an animal that die of themselves, running blood, food dedicated to other than God, or the meat of pigs, then it's lawful, if as long as it's not in those categories. But this is just for us, that when we sacrifice as submitters, we mention God's name, glorifying Him for giving us these provisions. So we mention God's name, just like you go and you start a car, you say Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, for example, and you mention God's name and you implore God. But at the same time, if you're going with someone else, I mean, you don't expect them to do it. But if they don't do it, doesn't mean you can't ride with them, for example, right? Like, so you're riding a bus and this guy doesn't say Bismillah. I mean, does that mean that you can't drive with him? Of course you can, So it's kind of like the same way I see with the food too. I mean, it's a thing you do if you have an animal yourself. You're sacrificing the animal. You can mention God's name yourself and you can slaughter the animal. But if you're buying it from the store, obviously, it's still lawful for you, as long as it's not in the prohibited categories as described by the Quran. We can't prohibit something that God has made lawful for us.
MashaAllah,
Yeah,
thank you.
Okay, so.
I just wanted to add to it that we have to
Mhm.
remember that this is a sacrifice in the name of God. So we have to pronounce it right. It's unlike any other slaughter. There's a what they do not differentiate these Muslims is that where there is a commercial slaughter and then there is a dedication to God alone, the sacrifice in commemoration with Abraham's submission and the whole thing about his son, and then God replaced it um, an animal. So we commemorate. When we do Hajj, we basically commemorate some part of that event as well. So when we dedicate an animal to God, it's in the name of God because it's a sacrifice. It's not just any slaughter. We're sacrificing something from our pocket in the name of God. That's why the verse, another verse, which is like, about some part they dedicate for their idol and some they say it's for God. And on the part which is for God, they don't even say name of God on it or something like that. I don't know if I'm saying that one right. Yeah,
Um,
but
Sorry, go ahead.
yeah. So like Solomon was explaining that if it's in the market, it's for other purposes. It's not a sacrifice of people that they have put the meat in the market now to be sold. So that's the difference.
Mhm. Yeah, I was gonna add that even if you are sacrificing like even if you have animals in, let's say you live on a farm or something, right? And you have animals and you're not doing Hajj, you're just consuming them yourself, you'll do the exact same thing. You'll mention, I mean, I didn't know that before, but you'll still mention God's name when you're slaughtering them yourself. You'll mention God's name upon that too. And the Messenger of the Covenant actually explained that in one of the audios as well. So it's really not very different from anything
Yeah, but
else. I
this
mean,
is a sacrifice, not a slaughter, right? So it's one of the part of the rites of Hajj. It even explains that you put your hand
yeah,
on
yeah.
it, right?
hmm Yeah, I
But
mean,
yeah,
it's
of
part of
course.
the rites of
Hmm.
Hajj, but it's nothing special in any other way. Like, we're not doing anything special. Like, the way you're slaughtering now, that's the same way you would slaughter yourself if you had animals of your own, you know? And that's how the Muslims do it too. But the only difference is that they say that if they don't do it, if someone else doesn't do it, that they can't eat from it. But that's the only myth that is, wrong. But other than that, I mean, that's just one of the duties we have to do. But we're not doing any kind of special, um, dedication or anything like that. That's separating it from, like, when one, let's say, like if you normally do it at your home for your own consumption. That's what I learned. Because otherwise, I was thinking that, if you don't have to do it, if you're doing it for Hajj, you're doing the sacrifice, then if you were doing it for your own consumption, like at your home, then you wouldn't have to mention God's name. But it turns out that you do. And I think it's also another one of the verses.
Yeah, Masha Allah, I guess that makes sense.
But I think the difference is that, we have to give a lot of it to charity. Like it says, you have to feed the needy and the poor. When you do it for your own, you don't have to do that, but these offerings will go towards just for our own consumption, but also the needy and the poor, and then they're donated to the shrine. So that's the part that is different, that they're mm, you know being donated to feed the poor.
I think there is another misconception there, which is people during, let's call that Qurbani Eid, right?
Mm,
The Eid al-Adha, that okay, you're
mm,
following Prophet Ibrahim's tradition,
mm.
and that's how they think that that's a right and that you have to do it. But
Right, right.
it clearly says that your only time you would do that when animal sacrifice during Hajj time,
Mm.
if you're going
Yeah,
to Hajj.
yeah, exactly. That's interesting. That's important. Yeah, yeah, because they think it's like a commemoration of, the part that God substituted him with an animal for the, yeah, but it turns out that's not. Uh, yeah, and then the other thing is, obviously, people think that in Hajj they have to sacrifice an animal even if they're at their home. Like people don't go for Hajj, and everybody
Right.
has an animal. Like, my dad will buy like a bunch of animals in the house, and they just like poop and pee everywhere for 4 or 5 days, and then there's blood everywhere, and then you have to clean up and all that, and it's just making the religion difficult. And the only time you have to do that is if you're going for Hajj. So people just it's an innovation. But there's also another thing is people have gone farther with that. People who call themselves submitters, but they have prohibited the meat from that by saying that they will not eat that meat because it's dedicated to an idol, which doesn't make sense. And they like if they live in places like the Middle East, and they get distribute the meat to the relatives and neighbors and all that, they will not eat from that meat, even though it's
Mhm.
only mentions God on the
So is
meat.
that like during the Hajj time you're referring to?
Yeah, like the
Eid
Eid
al-Adha.
al-Azha, so they don't
Yeah.
eat. Like there's people who call themselves submitters, for example, in the Middle East and stuff, and they're promoting this idea that that meat is unlawful for them to eat and stuff like that.
No,
Yeah,
no.
Mm.
That
yeah,
to God, yeah.
yeah,
Mm. Um,
yeah.
yeah.
So one of the viewers on YouTube also asked the question, and if you guys are okay with it, maybe one of us can answer. The question is if someone can explain 33:40, Surah 33, verse 40, which talks about Muhammad being the messenger and being the final prophet and the messenger. Um, so if anybody wants to take a stab at it. You guys hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Salman, if you want, start, and then we can come conclude.
Okay. Okay, Alex. Okay, so yeah, so 3340, I mean, it's very straightforward, and it's talking about uh, Muhammad being the final prophet and the last messenger. So, I mean, sorry, being the final prophet and the messenger, not the last messenger. And it's so that's the problem, is that people think he's the final prophet and the final messenger, but this, as the subtitle says, he was not the final messenger. It says he was not the father of any man among you. He was a messenger of God and the final prophet. God is fully aware of all things. So what is, one must ask, that what is the difference between a messenger and a prophet? And the difference is that a messenger is someone who is designated a messenger from God, who delivers, as the name suggests, who delivers a message, but it doesn't necessarily have to be in scripture format. But a prophet is someone who is a messenger of God as well, but his message is a scripture, and in Muhammad's case, that being the Quran, the final scripture, and we know there's no other scripture coming after the Quran, so that makes Muhammad the final prophet as well. And so, this shows us that he was the final prophet and a messenger, and God will continue to send other messengers to guide humanity throughout time. There's no place in the Quran that says Muhammad was the last messenger. So that is something that I think might be confusing to other people. But if you really look at the Arabic for this verse, I mean, you can see that the way it's structured, as you can see from the English, of course, it's not saying both. Like, if you wanted to say someone is a final prophet and a messenger, then you can say, okay, you can apply final to both messenger and prophet, but it said messenger first, and then it said and the final prophet, so the final only applies to the prophet part, not the messenger, so there's very peculiarly addressed in this way, but Satan still uses that to confuse the people, and because they don't understand the difference between the messenger and the prophet. So if you see the Arabic, it says Rasulullah wa Khatamun Nabi. So Rasulullah means the messenger of God, and then says the final prophet. So there really should be no room for confusion there. I guess that hopefully that clarifies it. Yeah. So that's it. Anybody else? Any comments? Any questions?
Salman, is there any reference article that maybe you can give to that person also?
No, there's no reference article, but there is that snippet from the glossary that I sent you last time when you asked me the same question.
I was wondering who was asking that question.
Yeah, someone also mentioned 16:123. I'm not sure why. But, okay, and also Steve said, Steve is making a comment on YouTube. Says, please see Appendix 12, Role of Prophet Muhammad from the Quran by Rashad Khalifa. Okay, interesting. Appendix. Yeah, Appendix 12. Okay. It's about Hadith and Sunnah. Okay. Steve, are you about to make a comment? I hear the people in the background. Oh. Oh, it's okay. Okay, guys. Awkward silence. Yeah, maybe anyone else has any comments about verse 15, how they see happiness now and forever.
Salman, what was the chapter and verse?
Surah 22, verse 15.
22:15.
Yeah.
Okay. I think when you explained it, it was pretty clear.
Oh, okay, thanks so much. I just wanted to get, maybe another perspective. But it's okay, yeah.
So it's Nudrat's on?
Yeah.
Yeah. You want my perspective? Yeah. No, Masha Allah is one of my favorite verses. Praise God. In this world, we have many ties attached to us, mentally, dependencies on, sometimes uh, we think I have this problem, so this kind of action would resolve this problem or something. It's like a challenge from God. God says, try it sometimes. That if you think, you know, if you sever, let's see, a child thinks, okay, you know, in hard times, my parents can help me, or a patient thinks a doctor will take care of this. Let's say all these are little ties. We somehow, our routine dependencies on other than God here. But let's say you decide one day, I'm not gonna absolutely ask anybody or depend on anybody or anyone for anything except God. This is like a challenge. I see it as a challenge from God. Like, come on, do this and see how if you are mentally and full-heartedly depend on God for any crisis or anything, and you sever all ties, then how God will eliminate any of that problem which is bothering you. So basically the challenge is first we have to sever any emotional, mental, physical ties of dependency on anything other than God. Basically our mind is so submitting that we absolutely say it's going to happen from God. They have written books about law of attraction and this and that, the secret and blah blah. So those things are basically, you want it so much that you will have it, right? This is what God is simply saying. He's running everything anyway. So if anything bothers you, why don't you turn to me? I have seen it so many times, experienced it. Little things, sometimes little things are bothering. Like, for example, my daughter brought this cat, and I had cat allergies all my life, and she said, "No, mom, but this cat is not. You're not gonna have any allergies because it's proven not to have, spread allergies." Blah blah. About 1 week later, same problem. I had cat allergies like you would not imagine. The highest one can have. I would walk in a house and I would know there is a cat because right away I would break into hives and sneezing, and my breath would go just out of it. So I said, "No, my dear, we have to get rid of her because otherwise I'm getting sick again." So she held my hand and she said, "No, we just cannot let this happen every time. We're going to pray to God." And guys, I share with so many people, this is a miracle in my life I have experienced. We prayed, held hands. Since that day until today, not even a bit of allergy from cat. Actually, my daughter became so excited. 2 weeks later, there were two cats in my house, let alone one, and the other one with the big hair and like full of allergy in other days. So yeah, subhanallah. When we put all our trust in God and sever every tie and we implore Him, but it's our weaknesses sometimes we get worried and we get ask others for help, and that is a shortcoming, you know, that we have to take care of. Mashallah.
Mashallah. Thank you.
Mashallah. So, Man, I think we covered all the questions.
Yeah. Yeah,
It
it
was
appears.
you explained very well,
Oh,
and a lot of them was also straightforward.
so thank you. Yeah. I mean, if anybody has any off-topic discussion, I mean, or off-topic questions, we could discuss those. Um,
Can we
Can
discuss
I ask
after the stream?
Streaming. Sure, we could. Well, our stream has barely run for like 59 minutes, so
I want to ask, did we change from 6 to 5 o'clock?
no, we
Oh,
changed to 4:30
Oh my God.
because some people were saying that it was too late for them,
in
Oh
the
and
yeah.
East
yeah,
Coast, yeah.
yeah.
Actually, Edward, that was me. It was too late for us, and we asked whoever was in the study that day if they could change.
And the Saturday one is a half hour later too. Edward, FYI,
9:30.
9:30 your time.
Okay.
Or when Solomon wakes up.
Oh yeah, Saturday is a whole different thing for Salon.
I mean, we've been regular last few weeks. I mean,
Yeah, yeah,
on
Masha
time.
Allah. Just bugging you, Salon.
Yeah,
It's
Mansoor.
fun to
We
bug
were
you.
pretty good recently, actually.
Masha Allah.
Yeah, one time, it was time for study, but I mean, it was Saturday, and the whole time, like, I was dreaming that someone was telling me, you can't be late for the study, you can't be late for the study in my dream. And I woke up and I was the first one there for like an hour.
Wow.
I was on time.
Praise God. Yeah. Angels were
But,
waking you up.
Solomon, even we feel bad for you because, you wake up Saturday, you work all week, and then you wake up Saturday morning. You just want to sleep in after Fajr,
I know.
but you really don't get that
That
option.
No,
is true.
mashallah, it's good.
Mashallah. Credit.
Mashallah. Yeah. Actually, on
Yeah.
other days I wake up late, so it's good for me.
Oh, okay.
It's
I just want to say, severing ties also doesn't mean that we become lawless, right? That, like, oh, okay, I'm going to speed and I'm going to cross red lights and, I'm not, I don't care. God is with me. It's just, we have to respect certain boundaries, whatever the country we are in. And, um, but emotional dependency that anyone else can harm us or benefit us other than God, that's a tie. That's our emotional baggage depending, because this world prepares you like that, raises you like that. The while submission is complete freedom from ties. That's why God says, did we not unburden your load that you were carrying? Basically, when we submit, we unburden because we understand there's nothing in our hands. We have no control over anything. It's basically giving up on the illusion of control that we have.
mm,
That's what submission is, right? And God is running everything anyway. So why don't we have all these, you know, uh, kind of
yeah,
ties attached to us?
yeah. I was looking at the one from Pickthall, the translation for
I know those are like
2250.
horrendous. Like
Yeah,
have a rope and hang yourself basically,
yeah,
and see, and then you see whether you die or you don't.
yeah.
Basically.
Yeah,
Oh my
Pickthall
God.
says, whoso is wont to think through envy that Allah will not give him Muhammad victory in the world and the hereafter,
Oh my God.
and is enraged at the thought of his victory, let him stretch a rope up to the roof of his dwelling, and let him hang himself. Then
Allahu
let him
Akbar.
see whether his strategy dispelleth what whereat he rageth.
First of all, why make so complicated? God made Quran easy to understand. My goodness. Holy. First you learn English, then you learn Shakespearean English,
Yeah,
and
but
then you, oh gosh.
yeah, but basically they're all saying just kill yourself if you think that God cannot support
Yeah.
Muhammad, just kill
Right
yourself.
away, such a blasphemy of this verse, right?
Yeah,
Making a
subhanallah.
mockery.
Yeah, but this shows
Subhan.
that law that says that only the sincere can grasp the Quran. And if you're not sincere, you cannot grasp, you're gonna be shielded from the Quran, so you cannot grasp the meaning of anything. I mean,
Mhm.
we read so many verses about the completion of the Quran and it being the only source of religious guidance, and I mean, all these are verses from the Quran, but obviously these people don't have any access to that.
Just like that lady was
Yeah.
saying 10 years earlier, and Solomon, you don't
Yeah.
understand? You're being shielded. 10 years, it would be like the whole world will be resurrected, all the dead people, and
Yeah.
we'll be here living 10 years. Where did that come from?
Mm.
That is a new thing I've ever heard.
Yeah.
But you know what? I read her comments and I think she did it out of sincerity. I think she just didn't understand it because I've seen some of her other comments on other topics and I think she just didn't understood it properly. Maybe I think she's from Germany and I don't know if they have Quran study or they're with leaders and get things explained and things like that. So even if she hear anything from the audio or video, maybe it wasn't clear to her. I think it was more a case of like that.
Yeah, more case of limited English understanding, maybe, or
No,
concept
but
understanding.
I think she is an Arab speaker.
Her
She should
name is
know,
like that,
yeah, she should know
has
Arabic
a Muslim name,
before German.
right?
But I mean, either way, like the thing is that languages we're just saying talking about this that the language is irrelevant. So just the language part. I mean, I understand you're not having a community and all that, but language is irrelevant. And if you're sincere, you could be living in a different country, speaking another language, but you will still have the right understanding
True.
from the verse because you'll be able to grasp what God is saying. Um, the thing is, like, if someone has a misunderstanding, and it's fine to, you have a misunderstanding, you make a mistake, but then, someone points it out to you and explains it to you, uh, then you should be able to, make sense out of it. Like, there's clear verses that, for example, I mentioned, like, there was one that talked about, because she's saying that the day of resurrection is 10 years prior to the day of judgment, right? And then there's clear verse that says day of judgment, and then it says this is what will happen on the day of judgment. You'll get resurrected, and this and this and this and this happens. So clearly, that verse is saying that this on the day of judgment, people will be resurrected. So the day of judgment is the day of resurrection. But the thing is, like, she has come up with her own understanding. It's not even about that, because if you take one verse in a vacuum out of context, you know, you can take the verse out of context that says that, never, there's a verse, I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but it says, the Messenger of the Covenant gave the example of that verse when he talked about the same thing. He was saying that, I think it was to a deep when he said that like you can say like by taking a verse like honest, you can pick a verse from the Quran that says God will never resurrect the dead. You know, because but you're taking that verse out of context in a vacuum. Um, Obviously, because you're not taking the whole Quran and you're not putting it all in one context. So that wherever she took it from, she just kept superimposing and emphasizing on those verses, and everything else that I was telling her, she was just completely skipping that, like not giving it any value. So then obviously you're not gonna come to understanding. It's like the four meats thing.
So that was posted before last Saturday's study,
Yeah,
but
that
it
was
was
posted
how,
for.
yeah, how Ahmed saw it is how she's seeing it. So I
Mm-hmm.
think it's just a matter of the clicking didn't happen about the verse. And even it made me rethink. So I'm still rethinking, right? Because we saw it the way, how we see it the way how you're saying it. I've always seen it that way.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess the discussion was opened, and then I thought told myself I need to look this over again, you know. So I think it's the verse that we read last week. The way one of that verse was, it tends to make you think that um the day of resurrection will happen just as Gog and Magog reappear. And then it will throw you off that day of resurrection and day of judgment seems to be different. So I think that was the case because God willing she's sincere. Yeah. I just think she probably got thrown off. She thought what she was saying is right, but maybe it's something she will ponder about. Because it made me think too, right? Because that day when we were discussing it, it made me think too. I was like, wait a minute, I saw it this way. Could it be somewhere something else? Yeah.
Yeah, there's several verses, The thing is, again, if you're gonna take a verse in a vacuum, then it's gonna happen because there's several verses. I mean, I'll just read one of them, for example. It says, even the prophet cannot take more than the spoils of war that is entitled to. Anyone who takes more than his rightful share will have to account for it on the day of resurrection. That is when each soul will be paid for whatever it earned without the least injustice. So, day of resurrection is the day that is when each soul will be paid. And there's several, I mean, there's so many verses, right? And there's messengers of the covenants explanations that talks about this. Um, uh, it says, every person tastes death, then you will receive your recompense. You will receive your recompense on the day of resurrection. So you will receive your recompense on the day of resurrection. If it was in 2270, then you would think that you would get your recompense on
Yeah,
2270,
the same day
you know?
for same time for judgment too. It
Yeah,
never
she's clearly,
actually,
yeah.
yeah, it's so many places is the same
Mm,
bundle. It's
mm,
many events of that day. Since
mm-hmm.
we there will be no sense of time ever again. The time will become irrelevant. So the day of judgment has many, many events because the afterlife actually starts from that day.
Yeah, and the day of resurrection is in Arabic is a Yom al Qiyamah, right? It's not a separate day. It's you know it's you know
The day,
so
yeah.
Yom al Qiyamah, Qiyamah,
Hmm. Yeah,
right?
Kiamat, the
So how can you say
devastation and
in
yeah.
2270 is you know
Kiamat aa jayegi.
yeah, exactly.
No, but isolating like 10 years and literally in her
Mm,
mind, some events were going on a very different pace.
mm,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, it says, for example, on the day of resurrection, God will say, "Oh Jesus, son of Mary." So God will be there on the day of resurrection talking to
Oh
Mary.
my goodness.
So how is that going to happen? Jesus will be there in 2270 for 10 years. All these prophets will come back
It's
and
it's
ridiculous.
mhm. Same thing which doesn't go with the Quran is that belief of
Hmm.
um, these traditional Muslims that Jesus will come back
Hmm.
before the day of judgment and he will be resurrected. Maybe they th-
Hmm.
they confuse him.
Hmm.
They also make a
Yeah.
prophecy that probably he is the messenger of the covenant, the
Yeah.
Imam Mahdi, right?
Hmm.
And that goes against the Quran that no dead will come back here
Hmm.
again.
Yeah.
They dead will be resurrected on that day
Hmm.
to at the same time everybody, you know. Like
Yeah.
all the dead now are alive on the day of
Mm-hmm.
judgment. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it's
Yeah,
not.
exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I was just also reading this one, in Surah 10, verse 93, it says, Your Lord will judge them on the day of resurrection regarding everything they disputed.
Yeah.
So it's
See,
the
that
same
day is
day.
never gonna be a never-ending day.
Yeah.
That's the
Yeah.
thing, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, I cut you. Mhm.
No. No, I mean, this verse proves that the day of God will judge them on the day of resurrection. So the day of judgment is the same day as the day of resurrection,
Exactly. Yeah.
not a different day.
And that day has many names. God
Mm-hmm.
has called it few names.
Mm-hmm. Day of decision,
Day of decision. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yom Hasher.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what Hasher means, like devastation or something.
No, I think like it means like summoning, day of summoning.
Day of summoning.
What is Muslim, traditional Muslim of submitter? I think 99% of the people believe that there's resurrection and judgment day is the same.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think there's a lot of
Mm-hmm.
discrepancy in that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. See, this one says, On the day of resurrection, they ask you about the mountains, say, My Lord will wipe them out. He will leave them like a barren flat land. On the day of resurrection, the
Right.
mountains will be like a barren flat land. So will these people live on a barren flat land?
For 10 years, the
Yeah.
earth will be rolling up and down.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. And then it says,
Yeah.
On that day, everyone will follow the caller without the slightest deviations. All the
Mhm.
sounds will be hushed before the most gracious. You will hear nothing but whispers. On that day, the
Mhm.
intercession will be useless, except for those permitted by the most gracious, and whose utterances all faces will submit to the living, the eternal, and those whose burden by the transgressions will fail. You know, so it's pretty very clear. I mean, so there's really nothing I can say in her defense, really. To she just has to like get on. Uh, like just give up her opinion at this time. Hopefully, same thing for the saying that the people won't come back, but the ideologies will come back. But the ideologies can't come back now. I mean, that's pretty baseless also because we know that the ideologies of these people are here every now and
Mhm.
then. It's the same Satan bringing the
Mhm.
same things. Like for example, one of the things was the Shuaib people of Shuaib who were corrupt, right? And we
Oh
see that
yeah.
now the entire nations even more corrupt than a lot of these nations. I mean, look at countries like Afghanistan and so many countries in Africa. I mean, they're worse than probably some of those countries with their corruption. They were cheating and committing highway robbery and stuff. I mean, and those things are common. There was communities that were annihilated for committing idol worship,
Yeah.
right? And it's idol worship prevalent, and there's no universal law saying that idol worship is not happening. The
Yeah.
history keeps repeating itself over and over. We know that. So that's just, a interpretation.
I know the issue is like some people live without a community or a Quran study, so they usually have their own thinking sometimes, things which are not straightforward. They get their own version. So, and yeah, that's what happens. I mean, Messenger of the Covenant has said that now, because every community is so big, and there's some good people, and there's some, um, even like if there are some good people, that community will not be annihilated. But annihilation would be a different kind, mostly like individual or like a disease will go around which will identify that annihilation has come for these people, right? Or a tsunami will come and take most people of certain area. And year after year, those things happen to certain communities. And God says clearly in the Quran that people might come back to Him, that God give them these alarms or, warnings, but they eventually, when the time is up, then they are hit by some disease or famine or something.
Salman, we're still on live.
Yes, we're still on. I am just yeah, we're still on actually. So I've just updated the time on the pen, in the study times channel. So if there's no confusion in the future for people who are looking for the correct time. And our next teacher is going to be Adam, I believe, for Saturday. Our study is going to be at 9:30 Pacific time. So, God willing, we'll see you guys then. God bless you all. Assalamu alaikum.